Some breaking news as we start the program, I believe. Caleb, let me check my phone, which may be poor hostmanship. But uh, this, with a record number of votes, the 2023 Fan Favorite Coach of the Year, sponsored by AccuCenture. I don't know what they do. Goes to Josh Heupel. Heupel led the Vols to an 11-2 overall record and a 31-14 win over Clemson in the Orange Bowl. It's the Paul Bear Bryant Coach of the Year award. So it's kind of neat that Josh Heupel was able to win that the day, the season that they were able to break the streak against Alabama. So kudos to him. And I think I'm not sure how many Coach of the Year awards he's won. The fact that Sonny Dykes made it to the championship game, I'll be real frank with you. If there was a vote that I was a part of, I would have to go with Sonny Dykes. But other than that, Josh Heupel is going to be up for a lot of these awards, Caleb, and rightly so. What he did in the SEC is every bit as difficult as what I believe TCU did in a different way in the Big 12. TCU is probably better 1-8, but beating Alabama, holding on against Florida, beating Pitt, doing all that they did, I thought was pretty impressive. So I do think, though, that listen, I thought the South Carolina game was a huge gut punch at the time for Hendon Hooker's Heisman candidacy, for Tennessee's college football playoff chances. I do think it stuck with some people in terms of the AP voting and probably some Coach of the Year voting, but it was that kind of loss, Caleb. It sat with a lot of people when people had their eyes on Tennessee. Maybe if that type of loss happened in September, people aren't watching Tennessee as much. Maybe they even forget about it. But when it happened and with all eyes on, it's had an effect on some of this postseason award voting.
It has. I think the official media vote for the Paul Bryant Coach of the Year was still Sonny Dykes. I think this was a fan vote, wasn't it?
Yes, this was the fan vote, correct.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think that stuck with a lot of people. I also think that you could question maybe how. Look, we know the internal workings that went into the South Carolina game and why there were some struggles with the Jeremy Banks thing. Look, let's be honest. Let's call a spade a spade. Part of coaching is managing that and managing your team's psyche. And you can maybe criticize Josh Heupel for not kind of managing the team's mental state after that, because it seems like the defense clearly just quit on the team in that game and after the Banks suspension. So that might be a knock against him. But I agree, beating Alabama. Really, the thing that stands out with me with Heupel is the team got better as the year went on. Dave, you and I watched that Tennessee-Pittsburgh game, the second game of the second week of the season, and we thought, okay, Tennessee beat Pittsburgh. They got a chance to have a special start, but we didn't think they'd be in. That did not look like a team that was going to be in the college football playoff race 5 weeks, 6 weeks later. And
especially not when you the next week when you have one of your most talented players and arguably your most talented, experienced receiver in Cedric Tillman go out against Akron. I mean, that was another thing that you watch and you're like, uh-oh, I mean, this thing may not be really tenable.
I agree. Tillman goes out right before Florida. And again, even when Tennessee struggled with Florida, you kind of thought, okay, they stumbled to 4-0, but they took advantage of the easy schedule to start the year and build a profile for themselves. I mean, I think where they turned a corner, where you really start to think this team has a chance, was that LSU game. The way they came out after the bye to just blow out LSU and take such control of that game, that's when you started to think, okay, this team really could do something special. And that's a lot of credit to Heupel for the team getting better and better as the year went on. The Georgia loss, it was a loss to Georgia. No shame in that. The South Carolina game was just, that was the one knock against them. There were so many inner workings.
If you put TCU in Tennessee spot and they're playing that schedule, and Travis asked a lot of talk about TCU's schedule, do you think they could have played UT schedule? Okay, so UT schedule, I think Pitt is the one game that I'll look at that I think TCU probably would have lost. On the road early in the season, you have a Max Duggan who's just trying to get settled in. He wasn't even supposed to be at the starter at the beginning of the season. I think they lose that game. I think Alabama is probably a coin flip game if that game were at TCU. As far as South Carolina, you have all kinds of outside circumstances that you would think wouldn't have happened with TCU in that situation, but who knows? So I really believe Travis, and I listen. I'm SEC through and through. I love the SEC. People ask me, "Who are you a fan of?" and I say the SEC. So I believe that TCU would have fared maybe a little bit better than you with Tennessee's schedule. I think that there were three really, really good teams and a bunch of other teams. I think Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee were the really good teams in the SEC. I think that there were about 8 good teams in the Big 12, and that includes TCU. I think after Saturday night or Monday night, I don't look at them as an elite program. So they would struggle against Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia. No question about it. Obviously, they did on Monday, but I don't know that Tennessee, with not the deepest roster in the world, would have been able to do the same thing TCU did in the Big 12. And Caleb, I say that because it's more challenging from week to week. There were a lot of games where Tennessee was able to rest their guys in the second half. That's not going to be the case in the Big 12 if you're good 1 through 8. So the conferences are very different, and it makes it difficult to compare. But I think it's oversimplification to say that Tennessee played a much more difficult schedule than TCU. You?
Yeah, I would go there. We're leaving out a couple of teams though, because we are also leaving out LSU on the road. Does TCU win that game, and do they win the way Tennessee did? I think everybody talks about the Alabama game. The standout game for me is that LSU game. Tennessee came in. Look, there were a lot of other factors. It was a noon game at Death Valley. LSU was still kind of finding themselves under Brian Kelly. Tennessee's fresh off a bye, and it was one of those games where everything
11 o'clock local time. Let's remember that. And they practiced in the afternoon, and there was the quirky kick return fumble. I thought there were a lot of things that played in Tennessee's favor outside of their control in that game. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. I think so. Maybe TCU wins that game because of all the other exterior factors. You're probably right. I'm not sure but Alabama is the one I don't think is a coin flip. I think Alabama is where you see where Tennessee in certain areas has just better players than TCU. I don't think TCU hangs with Alabama, honestly. And so I think that's the difference. And Nick Saban, I think, eats air raid offenses for lunch as a as a defensive mastermind. So it's Sonny Dykes' air raid. All due credit to it. It's not like Heupel's offense, which is, and I know you talked to Cooper yesterday about the differences between Heupel's offense and other offenses. Whereas, even though Sonny Dykes runs the air raid well, he deserves a lot of credit. It's a tried and true. It's been out in college football for how many years now? 25 years. It's a long-standing system that a coach like Nick Saban would be familiar with. Heupel's offense, which is kind of a mix of the Art Briles RPO offense and the air raid, I still don't think I don't think defensive coordinators have figured it out yet. I think they will one day. I think it's kind of like the Spurrier offense in the 90s, but right now Tennessee's still in a situation where coaches haven't caught up to what Heupel's doing yet. And so that's the difference.
Very fair. According to teamrankings.com, Tennessee had the 4th most difficult schedule in the nation. TCU, do you want to guess where they are?
9th.
Pretty close. 6th. So they're pretty comparable, but in different ways. I think they're, again, top to bottom, top to 8. The Big 12 is better. The SEC had better teams at the top, and that proved true on Monday night. Travis said, in my opinion, they got lucky that Oklahoma and Oklahoma State were terrible this year. Travis, though, I'm going to be a little bit devil's advocate here and say that, well, Tennessee was very fortunate that they caught those LSU breaks that we just talked about. Tennessee was very fortunate that Alabama was as down as skilled positions as they have been since I can remember under this Nick Saban run. If they don't have Jahmyr Gibbs from Georgia Tech, who transferred, that is one of the more average skill position groups in the nation, not just the SEC. I mean, they are middle of the pack. Jahmyr Gibbs probably elevated them somewhere in the top 25 range because I think he's special. And then, of course, Bryce Young really elevates him. He's a skill position guy who I think is the best quarterback coming out going into the draft. Listen, if the Dallas Cowboys, I'll give him the ultimate compliment. If the Dallas Cowboys want to back over Dak Prescott with some sort of utility vehicle and draft Bryce Young and trade up, I'm fine with that because I'm a Cowboys fan and I think Bryce Young is special.